I came home 2 weeks early, dropped my bag by the door before I even got my boots off, and my roommate came around the corner so fast she almost took out the lamp. She saw my face, she froze for half a second like she couldn't believe it was really me, and then she crossed the whole living room in about 3 steps and threw her arms around my neck so hard I nearly stumbled into the wall behind me. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask why I was early. She just pressed her face into my shoulder and whispered, "Don't leave again," in a voice that was shaking so bad I felt it more than I heard it. My name is Daniel Foster. I'm 30 years old, and for the last 4 years I've worked rotations on offshore platforms, 6 weeks out, 2 weeks home, sometimes longer if the weather turned or the crew change got delayed. It's steady money, it's brutal on a normal life, and it is absolutely not the kind of job that lets you build anything easy with another person. I knew that going in. I told myself I was fine with it. Maya Lin didn't know any of that about me when we first became roommates. She just needed a second bedroom filled, and I needed somewhere cheap enough that 6 weeks of empty rent wouldn't bleed me dry every rotation. A mutual friend put us in touch 2 years ago. We met for coffee to make sure neither of us was a serial killer, and within 20 minutes we were splitting a plate of fries and making fun of the landlord's ad photos, which had clearly been taken during a different decade. She worked as a physical therapist at a clinic downtown, she laughed loud and often, and she had the kind of steady, capable energy that made a room feel less like it was about to fall apart. We signed the lease a week later. I figured it would be simple. 2 people, 2 rooms, a fridge with names on the good yogurt, and almost no actual friction because I was gone more than I was home. For a long time, that's exactly what it was. The first year, we were exactly what 2 roommates are supposed to be. Polite, considerate, a little distant in the way people are when they're being careful not to overstep. She left me notes about the water heater. I fixed her squeaky cabinet hinge without being asked. She learned which shelf in the pantry was mine. I learned that she talked to her plants like they owed her rent. It worked because neither of us tried to make it more than it was. The shift happened slow enough that I didn't clock it while it was happening. It's only looking back now that I can see exactly where the line moved. It started with the return days. Every rotation, I'd fly back into the regional airport late at night, tired in that specific bone-deep way that comes from 2 weeks of 12-hour shifts and bad sleep on a rig that never really goes quiet. The first year, I'd get a text from Maya saying something like, "Leftovers in the fridge if you're hungry," and that would be that. Sometime around the middle of the second year, I started coming home to the porch light left on, and a little later than that, to her actually awake on the couch with a show paused and a spot next to her like she'd been saving it. I didn't think much of it. Or I told myself I didn't. Then came the 6-week stretch that changed things, though I didn't know it changed anything until I was back on the rig, lying in my bunk, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the fact that I'd texted her more that rotation than I had my own sister. Little things. A picture of a sunset over the water. A complaint about the food. A question about how her physical therapy patients were doing, because she'd mentioned an older man named Mr. Alvarez who was working his way back from a hip replacement and refused to use his cane out of pure stubbornness. She'd send back these long paragraphs about her day that made me feel like I was still living in the apartment even when I was 300 miles offshore. By the time that rotation ended, I noticed something new when I walked through the door. She hugged me. Not a big deal on paper, roommates hug sometimes, but this one lasted a beat longer than it needed to, and neither of us pulled back first. We both just sort of laughed it off and blamed it on me being gone too long. I should have paid more attention to that laugh. It had a little too much relief in it for something that was supposedly no big deal. The trouble that led to this particular homecoming didn't start with me. It started with Maya's ex. His name was Cody Marsh, and from what Maya had told me over the 2 years we'd lived together, he was the kind of man who mistook control for love and mistook Maya's kindness for permission to keep circling back whenever his current situation fell apart. They'd broken up almost 8 months before I ever moved in, but every so often he resurfaced, always at exactly the wrong moment, always with some story about how he'd changed. About 4 weeks into my rotation, right in the middle of my time offshore, Cody resurfaced again. Except this time it wasn't a text message she could ignore. He'd shown up at her work. Twice. The first time, he waited in the parking lot after her shift, all smiles and apologies, saying he just wanted to talk. The second time, he came inside the clinic itself, made a scene in the waiting room when the front desk asked him to leave, and got escorted out by building security while 3 of Maya's patients watched. She didn't tell me any of this while it was happening. I only found out afterward, and that's part of what made the whole thing sting so much once I understood the full shape of it. I'd been 300 miles out in the ocean sending her sunset pictures while she was dealing with a man trying to corner her at her job, and she hadn't said a single word about it because she didn't want to worry me while I was stuck somewhere I couldn't do anything anyway. That's exactly the kind of person Maya is. She carries things quietly so other people don't have to carry them with her. It's a good quality right up until it isn't, right up until the weight gets too heavy for one person alone, and that's exactly what happened 2 nights before I came home. Cody didn't just show up at her work that third time. He showed up at the apartment. I only got the full story afterward, pieced together from Maya's shaking voice and the police report number she'd written on a sticky note stuck to the fridge like it was just another grocery list. He'd gotten her address somehow, probably from an old mutual friend who didn't know any better, and he'd knocked on the door around 9 at night, already agitated, already talking louder than a person should talk on someone else's front step. Maya didn't open the door. She called through it instead, told him to leave, told him she'd already asked him to stop contacting her. He didn't leave right away. He stood out there for almost 20 minutes, alternating between apologizing and getting angry, banging on the door hard enough that a neighbor eventually stepped out into the hallway and told him to knock it off or she'd call the building manager. Only then did he finally walk off, and only after telling Maya through the door that she'd regret shutting people out who actually cared about her. Maya called the police that night, more out of fear than anything else. They took a report, told her to document everything, told her to call again if he came back. She spent the rest of that night with every light in the apartment on and the chain lock engaged on a door that had never needed one before. She still didn't call me. I found that out later, too, and it was maybe the part that hit hardest, harder even than hearing about Cody himself. She'd been scared enough to leave every light on in the apartment, and her first instinct still wasn't to call the person 300 miles away who couldn't do a single thing to help her in that exact moment. She didn't want to hand me something I couldn't fix. She wanted to protect me from feeling helpless the same way she was protecting herself from feeling like a burden. That's what was waiting on the other side of my early flight home, though I had no idea any of it existed when I booked the ticket. My rotation was supposed to run 2 more weeks. Then a crew change scheduling issue on the platform, something about a helicopter maintenance window and a shortage of certified operators, meant 3 of us got bumped to an earlier transport than planned. I didn't think twice about it beyond being glad to get home sooner. I didn't even tell Maya I was coming back early. I figured I'd surprise her, walk in, maybe make a joke about how she owed me 2 weeks of the good coffee since I was cutting my own suffering short. The flight home felt longer than it should have. I remember sitting in the terminal with my duffel bag between my boots, scrolling through old texts from Maya without really reading them, just liking the feeling of her name at the top of the thread. I told myself that was just what happens when 2 people share a space long enough. Familiarity. Comfort. Nothing more complicated than that. I believed that story about myself right up until I put my key in the lock and heard her voice on the other side, tight and fast, the kind of tone that only comes out when someone's trying very hard to sound calm and failing. I opened the door and the first thing I saw was Maya standing in the middle of the living room with her phone pressed to her ear, one hand gripping the back of the couch like she needed it to stay upright. Every light in the apartment was on even though it wasn't that late. The blinds were shut tight, which they never were. There was a baseball bat, my old aluminum one from high school that lived forgotten in the hall closet, leaning against the wall by the door, close enough to grab in a hurry. She turned when the door opened, and for one terrible second I watched pure fear cross her face before she registered it was me and not someone else standing in the doorway. "Daniel," she said, and the phone slipped a little in her hand. I dropped my bag right there in the entryway. "Maya, what's going on?" She said something quick into the phone, something like "I have to go, my roommate's home," and hung up without waiting for whoever it was to answer. Then she just looked at me for a second like she genuinely couldn't process that I was standing there 2 weeks before I was supposed to be. "You're early," she said. Her voice cracked on the second word. "Crew change," I said. "Maya, why is there a bat by the door?" That's when she crossed the room and put her arms around my neck so hard I felt her shaking through my jacket, and that's when she said it, quiet, right against my shoulder, like she'd been holding the sentence in for days and it finally found somewhere safe to land. Don't leave again. I didn't say anything at first. I just held on to her because whatever was happening, it was clearly bigger than a bad day, and my brain was still catching up to the fact that the woman who never let anyone see her scared was shaking in my arms in the middle of our own living room. I'm here, I finally said, which wasn't much of an answer but felt like the only true thing I could offer in that moment. I'm not going anywhere tonight. Tell me what happened. It took her a few minutes to get steady enough to actually talk. I got her sitting on the couch, got a glass of water into her hands mostly so she'd have something to hold on to besides herself, and then I sat close enough that our knees were almost touching and waited. She told me about Cody, the parking lot, the waiting room, the knock on our own front door 2 nights earlier. She told me about the police report, the sticky note on the fridge that I hadn't even noticed yet, the way she'd sat up half that night with every light blazing because darkness felt like something she couldn't afford anymore. Why didn't you call me? I asked, and I tried to keep the hurt out of my voice, but I don't think I fully managed it. She looked down at the water glass. What were you going to do from 300 miles offshore, Daniel? Panic the whole rotation away? Get yourself hurt rushing to catch some flight that didn't exist yet? I didn't want you carrying this on top of everything you already carry out there. That's not your call to make alone, I said. Not anymore. She looked up at that, and something in her face shifted, like she'd heard the word anymore and it had landed somewhere she wasn't ready to look at directly. I know, she said quietly. I know it isn't fair to you either. I just didn't know what else to do. I reached over and took the glass out of her hands and set it on the table, mostly so I could hold both her hands instead. They were cold, colder than the apartment temperature explained. You call me, I said. Every single time. I don't care what I can or can't do from out there. You tell me. That's what this is supposed to mean. I didn't fully clock what I'd said until it was already out of my mouth. That's what this is supposed to mean. Like there was already an unspoken agreement between us about what we were to each other, something bigger than roommates splitting rent and a grocery list. Maya didn't correct me. She didn't laugh it off the way we usually did when the air between us got too honest. She just nodded, slow, like she was letting the sentence settle somewhere permanent. We sat like that for a long while, her hands in mine, the television off, the apartment too bright with every light still on because neither of us wanted to be the one to suggest turning any of them back off yet. Eventually I got up and checked every window latch in the place, checked the chain on the door, checked the peephole even though there was nothing to see but the empty hallway. Maya watched me do it without saying anything, and when I sat back down next to her, she leaned her head against my shoulder like it was the most natural thing in the world. I'm sorry you came home to this, she said. I'm not, I said. I'm sorry I wasn't here for the part before this. She let out a small, tired laugh. You're supposed to have 2 more weeks off the clock before you have to deal with my mess. You're not a mess, I said. And there's no clock on this. That earned me a real smile, small but real, the first one I'd seen since walking through the door. We didn't sleep much that night. I ended up on the couch, not because either of us decided it made sense, just because neither of us wanted to be the one who suggested going to separate rooms, and eventually she fell asleep sitting up beside me with her head on my shoulder and my old high school bat still leaning against the wall where she could see it. I stayed awake most of the night listening to the apartment's small sounds, the refrigerator humming, a car passing outside, anything that might have been a knock and turned out not to be. The next morning, everything felt different in the ordinary daylight way that things always do, but underneath the ordinary, something had shifted for good. Maya made coffee before I was even fully awake, moving around the kitchen with her hair still messy from the couch, and when she handed me a mug she let her fingers linger against mine for half a second longer than a mug handoff required. Neither of us mentioned it. We just sat at the little kitchen table, the same one we'd eaten 100 mundane breakfasts at, and something about the quiet felt heavier now, like both of us knew a line had been crossed the night before, even if neither of us had said the actual words yet. I called the clinic, she said after a while. I'm not going in today. Good, I said. I'll call the leasing office. See what they can do about the door camera the last tenant apparently ripped out. She looked at me over the rim of her mug. You're staying home today? I've got 2 weeks, I said. I'm not spending the first day of them anywhere but here. That got another smile out of her, softer this time, less like relief and more like something warmer settling in behind it. The next few days had a strange rhythm to them. Part vigilance, part something neither of us wanted to name yet. I fixed the broken porch light sensor that had been out for months. I installed a cheap motion sensor camera by the front door, the kind that sends an alert straight to your phone. Maya went back to work after 2 days, and I made sure I was the one who dropped her off and picked her up until the clinic's own security detail agreed to walk her to her car if Cody ever showed his face there again, which he didn't, not for a while. Evenings were when things really started changing shape. We used to spend them mostly apart, her in her room scrolling through something on her phone, me catching up on shows I'd missed offshore. Now we ended up on the couch together most nights, not always talking, sometimes just existing in the same space with the television playing something neither of us was actually watching. One night about a week in, she brought up Cody again, unprompted, somewhere in the middle of a movie neither of us had been paying attention to. Can I tell you something? She asked. Always. Part of why I didn't call you before, it wasn't just about protecting you from worrying, she said. It was that I didn't know if I had the right to ask you to worry. We're roommates, Daniel. I didn't want to make you feel like you owed me some kind of concern you never signed up for. I turned toward her on the couch. Maya, I've been signing up for that concern for 2 years. I just never said it out loud. She went very still. What do you mean? I thought about deflecting. I thought about turning it into a joke the way we always did when the conversation got too close to something real. Instead I just told her the truth, plain, the way I'd learned to talk on a rig where nobody has patience for anything dressed up. I mean, I look forward to coming home because of you, I said. Not the apartment. Not the bed that's actually mine instead of a bunk. I've known that for longer than I've wanted to admit, mostly because admitting it felt like it might ruin something that was already working fine as it was. Maya's eyes were bright, but she didn't look away. Why didn't you say anything? Same reason you didn't call me about Cody, I said. Didn't want to hand you something you didn't ask for. She let out a breath that was half laugh, half something shakier. We're both idiots. Considerable idiots, I agreed. She reached over then and took my hand, the same way I'd taken hers that first night, except this time neither of us was scared, or at least not scared in the same way. I don't want you offshore not knowing this, she said. I don't want to spend 6 more weeks pretending I don't think about you the entire time you're gone. Then don't pretend, I said. She leaned in slow enough that I had every chance to pull back if I wanted to, which I very much did not want to do, and when she kissed me it didn't feel sudden at all. It felt like something that had been sitting quietly under 2 years of shared groceries and porch lights left on, finally getting the chance to say what it had been trying to say the whole time. When we broke apart, she rested her forehead against mine for a second, breathing like she'd been holding something in for a long while and had just set it down. That's new, she said. That's overdue, I said. She laughed, and this time it was the real one, the loud one I remembered from that very first cup of coffee 2 years earlier, and it filled the apartment in a way that made the whole ugly week with Cody feel a little further away. Things were not instantly simple after that, because real life rarely lets you have the easy version. Cody wasn't finished causing trouble just because Maya and I had figured ourselves out. About 4 days after that conversation he showed up outside the building again, this time late at night, this time clearly having had a few drinks first based on how he was talking when the motion camera caught him standing at the base of the stairwell. My phone buzzed with the alert around 11 at night, and I was up and moving before Maya even fully processed what had woken us both up. Stay inside, I told her, grabbing my jacket. Daniel, don't go out there alone. I'm not going to fight him, I said. I'm going to make sure he leaves and call the police the second he doesn't. She grabbed my arm. I'm coming with you or you're not going. We went down together, and I want to be honest and say my heart was pounding harder than it ever did on the rig during a bad weather call, because this wasn't machinery and ocean, this was a person who'd already proven he didn't respect boundaries, standing at the bottom of the stairs to the building where the woman I loved lived. Cody looked up when he heard the door, swaying slightly, his eyes red-rimmed in the porch light. "Maya," he said, ignoring me completely. "I just want to talk." "You need to leave," I said, stepping slightly in front of her, not aggressive, just present. "She's already told you that. Multiple times." He finally looked at me properly, sizing me up the way men like that always do, deciding whether I was worth the trouble of a confrontation. "Who even are you?" "Someone who's already got the police on the phone," Maya said from behind me, holding her phone up, screen lit, call already connecting. That seemed to land harder than anything I could have said. Cody's face shifted from belligerent to uncertain in about 2 seconds flat. "I wasn't going to do anything," he said, voice suddenly smaller. "Then leave," I said. "And don't come back here again." He looked between the two of us one more time, muttered something about how nobody understood what he was trying to do, and then he actually left, stumbling back toward a car parked crooked at the curb. Maya kept the police on the line until his taillights disappeared around the corner, gave them his plate number, and finally hung up once the dispatcher confirmed a patrol car would swing by the area. We stood on the stairs for a minute after that, both of us breathing harder than the situation should have required, adrenaline working its way out of our systems. "You didn't have to do that," Maya said finally. "Yeah, I did," I said. "There was never a version of this where I stayed upstairs." She looked at me for a long moment, something settling behind her eyes that looked a lot like the opposite of the fear from that first night. Something steadier. "I love you," she said, like the words had just decided they'd waited long enough. "I should have said it up there before all that. I just needed you to know it doesn't only exist because you protected me tonight." "I know," I said. "I love you too. Have for a while now." We went back upstairs together, checked every lock twice out of habit more than necessity, and for the first time since I'd walked through that door 2 weeks early, the apartment actually felt calm, not the tense kind of quiet we'd been living in, just ordinary peace. Cody never came back after that. Whether it was the police report finally catching up to him, or just the fact that he'd finally run into someone who wasn't going to let him corner Maya again, I never found out for certain and honestly didn't care to. What mattered was that the fear stopped being a daily weight in that apartment, and something else had room to grow in its place. The rest of my 2 weeks home passed differently than any homecoming before it. We stopped pretending the couch was neutral territory. She started leaving her door open at night instead of closed. I stopped calling her my roommate in my head, even in passing thoughts, because the word had quietly stopped fitting weeks before I was willing to admit it out loud. The morning I had to leave for my next rotation, Maya stood in the doorway the same way she had 100 times before, except this time there was no pretending underneath it. 2 weeks isn't going to feel the same, she said, arms crossed loosely, trying to sound steady. It's going to feel longer, I said. Every single day of it. She smiled, a little watery around the edges. Call me. Every day you can. I don't care if it's just 5 minutes. Every day, I said. And you call me the second anything feels wrong. Anything at all. No more carrying it alone. Deal, she said, and she kissed me at the door the way people kiss each other when there's a departure gate looming somewhere in the near future, slow and a little too aware of the clock. That rotation felt different from everyone before it, and not in a bad way. I found myself watching the horizon more, thinking about the apartment more, counting days down instead of just letting them blur together the way I used to. Maya kept her word. She called almost every evening, told me about her patients, told me about the plants she swore weren't dying even though I was fairly sure at least one of them was, told me small ordinary things that made the distance easier to carry because I knew exactly what I was carrying it toward. When that rotation ended, I didn't come home early that time. I came home right on schedule, and Maya was waiting at the airport instead of the apartment, standing near the baggage claim in a coat I recognized, holding a coffee she'd clearly bought for herself and then abandoned the second she saw me come through the doors. She didn't run into my arms that time. She walked, steady and sure, like a woman who wasn't scared anymore, and when she reached me she just wrapped her arms around my neck and said, quiet, right against my ear, welcome home. It wasn't the same words as before. It didn't need to be. The fear from that first early homecoming had turned into something entirely different, something that didn't need a whispered plea to keep me close, because we'd both already decided that on our own. A year later, we moved out of that apartment and into a place we picked together. No landlord's outdated photos involved this time, just the two of us walking through empty rooms deciding where the couch should go. Maya still works at the same clinic. Mr. Alvarez finally started using his cane without complaint, mostly, according to her, because she threatened to switch him to a walker if he kept falling on principle. I still work the same rotations, 6 weeks out, 2 weeks home, except now those 2 weeks feel less like a break from real life and more like the actual center of it, the part everything else orbits around. Cody never resurfaced again. I like to think it's because he finally understood there wasn't room for him in a life that had already closed around something steadier. Maya doesn't think about him much anymore, and when she does, it's mostly to shake her head at the version of herself who once thought she had to handle everything alone so nobody else would have to be inconvenienced by her fear. Sometimes, on the nights before I fly back out, she still gets quiet in that particular way, and I know without asking that she's thinking about that first early homecoming, the one where she came around the corner too fast and nearly knocked over the lamp, the one where she said don't leave again like the words were the only thing holding the whole night together. I never have, not really. Not in any way that mattered. Every rotation ends the same way now. I walk through that door and she's there, and neither of us has to whisper anything desperate into the other's shoulder anymore, because we already know. Would you have gone downstairs that night, or stayed inside and just called the police? And have you ever had a moment where someone you thought you knew showed you exactly how much you actually meant to them? Tell me your story in the comments. If you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.